Hey there, friends, and welcome to Living Life with Wendy, the podcast that's all about personal development, mindset, leadership, and business growth, but like in a totally relatable and casual way. I'm Wendy, your host and personal development guru. Well, at least that's what my friends call me. And in each episode, I'll be chatting with experts in the field, sharing my own experiences, and giving you tips and strategies for success that you can actually use in your everyday life. So whether you're looking to improve yourself, climb the corporate ladder, start your own business, or get out of your own way, we've got you covered. So grab a seat, put your feet up, and let's chat about how to live your best life together. So I am so excited to have Neha Naik, the founder and CEO of 3 successful businesses, including a successful recruitment agency called RecruitGyan on the podcast today. I am very, very excited because we're going to talk about recruitment. We're going to talk about the importance of recruitment, retention, and we're going to start by hearing Neha's story of how she became the founder and CEO of her own company. So the floor is over to you, Neha. I am so excited to hear about your journey.
Thank you for having me, Wendy. Thank you to all the listeners who are tuning in right now. Super excited to be here and talk to you guys about this incredible episode that we're about to embark on. So a little bit about my story. I actually started my recruiting career by happenstance. So aspired to be a physician growing up, did a double major in biochemistry and psychology, did a master's in medical sciences, took the MCAT with the intention of going to med school. At med school, I realized it wasn't for me. So I ended up dropping out about a year in, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with my life. I've always had a job since I was 16. And so I took a couple months to kind of figure that out. And I was on Indeed and just kind of applying to jobs on there in Craigslist, and basically came upon a recruitment job in the medical center. And I was like, okay, let's try this. I don't know what recruiting is. Like, we're just going to do it. Right. So I show up there. The lady talks to me and she's like, we haven't had any applicants. You seem like, young, bright, sharp, you can talk, like, let's get you started. And I was like, okay. And they were actually replacing someone who had to go on maternity leave early on with some, pregnancy complications. So they were desperate, which worked out in my favor. So I was like, let's do it. Let's start. So that's how I got into recruitment. I absolutely ended up loving it. I love that I was talking to people. I love that I was hiring people and literally changing their lives for open positions. I love that I was supporting the admin and the HR functionality at the hospital as well. And so from there, worked with an agency, worked at in-house positions. And about 7 years ago, my husband and I got married and we started talking about starting a family. And so decided to, and there was the company I was with at the time, they weren't doing so well, right? It was politically just a toxic culture, but the revenue wasn't where it needed to be. And so I was like, you know what, I'm done. So I decided to just respect myself and step away. And I didn't think about, okay, what's going to happen, in terms of income and all that, right? Because one, my husband had a job, but we also didn't have a ton of responsibility. So I knew I could experiment and started my own agency, literally watching a Netflix show, went to like name.com, found a domain name, set it up, and then really cold called my way into getting clients. So when this started about, 7.5 years ago, I had a couple of clients to start with, and then word of mouth referrals, some social media, just really increased it. And so, now I have a 7-figure recruiting agency. I have about 40 people on my team. It's been great. And I mostly work with tech startups. It's just the few clients that I got at the very beginning when I started this journey were startups. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I love this culture. I love that I get to work directly with the founders and the decision makers at the company and just really help the startup scale, right? Whether it's getting funding, whether it's going IPO, whether it's getting, acquired by another bigger company. I think those are all just very positive things that happen for a lot of founders when they're starting businesses. So here we are. So that's a little bit about my background. I do live in Houston, Texas, and with my husband, and I have a 6.5-year-old baby boy and a 3.5-year-old baby girl.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's so interesting that you make such a good point, especially as a entrepreneur yourself, right? The line to where you end up is never straight. Mm-hmm. In fact, quite often, I know there's a lot of images you can find on the internet that it's a very scrambled line, right?
you start your career in one mindset and then you go and you end up totally in a different space. And I think that's what makes successful entrepreneurs, because they're open-minded to the possibilities. I recognize that a lot, especially working with my clients, right? A lot of times they'll say that when they start to work on themselves, it starts to open up space and things start to come to them. And it sounds like that kind of happened to you as well.
Exactly. It's a lot about making mistakes and failing and trying and getting burned and then getting up and trying again, right? And I think that's part of the journey. And I think you're supposed to go through that, and you're meant to go through that so that you come out on the other end of the tunnel, with more confidence, with more pizzazz, with, just the authenticity and the credibility that your clients ultimately, need of you. So when you're going through it, it's of course really overwhelming. It's confusing. It's frustrating, right? You're like, I don't know what I'm doing in life. I don't know where I'm going right now. I don't know what the heck's going on with my clients. But eventually it just kind of all makes sense. And then looking back now, I'm like, wow, like I just remember being in a parking lot at Kroger and sitting there and crying and being, I don't know what to do with my life. Right. And I called this like what is a temp agency. And I was talking to the woman, but I was like crying. And the woman was like, you're going to be okay. I promise you, you're going to be okay. Deep breaths. And I just remember that moment specifically where I was like, now that I look back, like, wow, like look at the kind of the evolution and the progression. Right. But it does take, kind of falling down a little bit and kind of going through the weeds, right? It's not easily handed to anybody. So you have to go through and kind of make your own mistakes and learn the hard way. But when you then have amazing stories to tell, right? And this is how you're going to build relationships and rapport with your clients and your team members.
Yeah. So I hear a couple of things, right? You're very resilient. Like you said, fall down, pick yourself up. But you know what? I think you also demonstrated a ton of courage as well. Because when you think about cold calling, a lot of that holds a lot of people back, right? Because of that fear of rejection. I think that's the big one, because they're afraid of the no. But when you embrace the no, the yeses come.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a couple of books that talk about, sales. Like there's Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He's a FBI negotiator. Amazing book. There's Go for No. And they talk about how you use no to build that muscle, right? And a lot of people are like, I don't have the sales gene, or I'm not, but the thing is, you sold one thing or the other to someone else in your life, right? Whether it's selling healthy food to your kids, like eat your broccoli, it's good for you. Whether it's selling your husband on getting you that expensive bag for your birthday, whatever that looks like, you've done it before, right? And it's really interesting in the book, Go for No. I forget the author's name all the time, but he always talks about, when you're kids, you don't get phased by that word, right? Like, I want cookies. And the mom keeps saying no, but eventually the mom gives in. But you don't have the kid like, oh my gosh, she said no, I'm going to stop asking. They go harder at it. But it's when we start growing up, right? And then we start getting that whole thing about, oh my gosh, like I don't want to fail. I don't want to not do well. I don't want to make mistakes. And, if I keep pushing myself, then all these things are going to happen. And society tells us that failing is not good, right? Yes. I mean, that's basically what we're taught. And so when we have that old programming and we grow up with that, then it's really hard to pick up that phone, right? And when I do cold outreach, I mean, I get all like, take me out of your inbox, take me out of your email list, stop spamming me, like read the news, right? And I just laugh it off, because the truth is there's going to be people who say that, and there's also going to be people that buy you. But if you never go out there and you never learn to sell what you're selling, you're never going to come out being a successful business owner. You're always going to be stuck, yes, in what you earn, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right. It takes courage. It takes courage to be okay with saying no to. Like, that's something that it was hard for me, right? And so I was like, okay, but now when people say no, I'm like, that's fine. Like, and no doesn't mean never. It just means not right now. So you just have to kind of keep going.
Yeah. So being a Canadian that I am, there's a really great saying from Wayne Gretzky. He says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And 100%. It is a mantra, right? Because you've got to take that. And I love that you equate it to when you're young. It's true. We get these things. We grow into our fears, right? I mean, I have a young granddaughter right now, and you watch them learn to walk, and they do it fearlessly. Like, they don't think about falling, right? They just think about, hey, I can put my foot in front of my foot, and they keep going. And sometimes they fall and they cry a little bit, but they don't stop trying to walk. And I think that is a great analogy of just how we as entrepreneurs can really lean into the fear and look at those no's as an opportunity for a maybe in the future and potentially a yes. And eventually you're going to get a yes, right? It's kind of like the laws of averages.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. I'm so glad that you shared that. Now, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit about recruiting, right? Because we kind of talked a little bit about this before we jumped onto the podcast, and really about how recruiting is such an important element in finding the right candidate, and how emotional intelligence, EQ, kind of plays into choosing that right candidate.
Yes, definitely. So I think, one of the things I want to point out is, when you're hiring for a position, it's really, really hard not to get bogged down by the hard skills, right? Which is the actual technical skills the person needs, the years of experience, the education background, all that stuff that they need to do a job. I am not against that. I totally understand that a pharmacist cannot do an engineer's job and vice versa, right? The training's completely different. It's totally two different things that we're talking about. Now, that being said, I feel where hiring managers and founders need to be lenient is emotional intelligence is a huge deal. And that's something that isn't necessarily taught. Like, you can go to school and learn math, and you can go to school and learn engineering or pharmacy or be a doctor. Nobody can teach you really to be nice, right? Like, it's some stuff that you pick up on when you're growing up based on your culture, your values, how you were raised, right? Nobody can teach you like cooperation. Again, that's skills that you learn when you do team sports and activities, right? But you don't have a lesson on like, okay, today we're going to talk about cooperation. It just doesn't happen. And so I always urge, hiring managers and team leaders to think, okay, it's great if we meet 50 to 70% of the hard skills. I want you to then keep the door open for the other 20 to 30% on soft skills. So don't reject a candidate because they have, instead of having 5 years of experience, they have 3.5 or 4 years of experience, right? You want to think of like, how do they talk during an interview? What are some of the initiatives they've taken at their previous company? What are their references coming in at? Yeah, right? Because if you get stuck on, I want 5 years and not a day less, you're going to miss out on great candidates who've done probably more in the 3.5, 4 years because they were at a startup and they had to take a lot of responsibility and learn a lot and go through like a really quick learning curve, where someone at a, like an enterprise level company can take their time and onboard and do the things, right? And it's a little bit slower. And so I always encourage, founders and leaders to do that. Now, on the flip side, if you are a candidate and you are applying, speak up about your emotional intelligence, right? Talk about how you cooperate, talk about how you take ownership, talk about how you don't need micromanagement and how you listen and you are a team player. Do not undervalue your emotional intelligence. I see candidates doing this all the time. When I say, tell me what you've done at your previous job, it's like, well, I did this and I did that, and none of it talks about that. It's always like they're reading off the bullets in your resume, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you do want to infuse it with the emotional intelligence quotient, right? Because I think that's such a huge deal that for hiring managers and team leaders, you have to pay attention to, and for candidates, you have to be able to talk about that about yourself. It goes back to selling. Selling your skill set, selling your EQ is really what's going to get you to the next level, whether it's salary, whether it's equity, whether it's the title that you're looking for, right? And if you don't toot your own horn, no one's going to do it for you. So you have to be ready to take ownership and talk about that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I love that, right? Because I'm actually certified in EQ. And I think one of the things to consider too is that interaction with team members is something that can be learned. That's the one thing about EQ. It can be developed, right? Once that person becomes more self-aware of how they tick and how they interact with others. I think that's super important. And so hard skills are important, you're right, but you can learn skills as well on the job, right? Because I think there are nuances in every business that distinguish them specifically in their field, and even in tech, depending on what they're developing. Because, I think we do miss a lot of good candidates because we look at the CV on their experience only, and we don't ask the right questions. And then you can get this really great person who has all this experience, but they're not fitting into the team because of their EQ. Some EQ things, if people aren't self-aware, I mean, you can't change people if they're stubborn, right? So I think those are things for hiring managers to really look for, but it's also on that person hiring, that leader, to also be very self-aware and what they're looking for, right? And how they react.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's something that people need to pay more attention to. And I think I'm seeing that shift for sure. But it could be a bigger shift, right? Like I think there's always room for improvement. And so, when I work with my clients, I'm very particular, is that important to you? Because I've had clients tell me we only want them to graduate from this university. And I'm like, no, I can't help you. Like I feel like that's a direct cultural mismatch to the types of clients that I want to work with. Right. And so I'll be very honest, like if you really want people from only Stanford and Harvard, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't feel like that's a healthy recruitment process, right? It's not good from a diversity standpoint. It's not good from an inclusivity standpoint. It's definitely not good from an EQ standpoint either.
Yeah. And that's super important. Your point, right? As an entrepreneur, as a CEO in your business, you have to take action that aligns with your values. Mm-hmm. And not every customer, client, whatever you want to call them, is going to be in alignment with what you believe in. And it's okay, because it's a two-way street, right? Mm-hmm. In that relationship, that it's not just saying yes to every client that comes knocking at your door. It's also being discerning and making sure the person you work with is a good match with what you believe in.
Exactly. It's okay to walk away, because I do believe, to touch on that, when you become an entrepreneur, you stand up for something, which means you're going to stand against something. There's always going to be polarity, right? Yeah. No matter what you do, and it's good to have polarity. You don't want to come off as an entrepreneur who's a people pleaser. Like, you're not going to get clients. Clients are going to think you're flimsy, indecisive, finicky. You don't want that, right? So you really want to be the entrepreneur that stands up for something, which means whether you want it or not, you're going to stand against the other thing, right? And when you do, you're going to get people that aren't okay with that, right? Like, no, I want it done that way. And that's okay. Maybe you find another recruiter that will help you in your specific task, but at this time, it's not me. And it's okay to walk away, because you save yourself a lot of headache, right? Down the line. Because, for me, when we become business owners, we're emotionally involved, whether we want to be or not. We want our clients to be successful. And so if you know that you cannot guarantee this client's success because what they're looking for is in, opposition to what you truly believe in, then it's better to walk away at the very beginning.
And that's such a great point. It's the same when we're hiring people, right? It's okay to walk away from certain candidates, even though they might have all the technical skills that tick all the boxes. If something isn't right, if something just isn't in alignment, it's okay, because there will be another one.
Exactly.
And I think that's important. Now, you also are really, you have an expertise in talking about how empathy plays into the recruiting process, right? So I'd love you to share that a little bit more with my listeners as well.
Sure. And I think, to talk about that, I want to talk about typically a recruitment process that isn't thought out doesn't have the empathy component, because I feel like, as recruiters, I always joke, we're like part counselors, part therapists, part friends, part advisors, part financial consultants. It's like, people ask us, what's the comp range? What's the equity? So we get all these, different components where people tell us, I was let go for this reason. I don't like my manager and this and this and this, and I have 3 kids. And, so we really play such a multifaceted role in the interview process. Now, that being said, the way to get people, candidates or hiring managers to trust you is to empathize, right? And it's really hard to do sometimes. It's one of those things where you have to really proactively do it, right? Because I've seen, recruiters, even on my team, screen people in 10 minutes. And I'm like, that was a horrible screen. Like, we didn't really dive deep. We didn't really understand what their motivation was, their cultural motivation was, their intrinsic, extrinsic motivation was. So we really don't know what to do with this person now, right? And now I don't want to go back and get another call, but we have to. And so really playing that empathy, I feel really listening to what people say, asking guided questions, because at the end of the day, how empathetic you are during the recruitment process ties into how much information you're going to get from the candidates and from the hiring managers, right? Which means that when you are placing candidates, you will have a direct correlation with the retention rate. So how empathetic you are has a direct positive correlation with the retention rate. And the reason is, and we've all gone through really good interviews, we've all gone through really bad interviews in our life, right? And if you think about the amazing interviews that you've had, you've probably stuck around that company a lot longer than you did when you had a poor interview, right? And so I don't even have to give you any data. You can use your personal experience, right? And so I think the bottom line is, when you are an empathetic recruiter, whether you are consulting with the hiring manager on best practices and providing empathy, because knowing that hiring managers, that's not their only job. They're actually there to do a job, and then they're hiring managers on top of that, right? So providing them with empathy and asking them for good, calibrated, constructive feedback on candidates and opening that two-way street. And then with candidates, allowing them to open up is going to allow you to get the offers to close a lot quicker, because there's going to be a lot more calibration done, and you're not having to freak out about, oh my gosh, are they going to sign my offer or go to another company, etc. And when they do sign the offer, the onboarding and the retention, skyrockets, because now you basically covered all of that during the recruitment process. You've infused empathy in the right place, and you're ensuring that when your candidates do join you, the onboarding seems seamless and they actually are excited to be there. And not just that, but now they're referring people, which ultimately cuts down on your recruitment costs. So there's so many benefits to being empathetic.
That is such, I would say a great way to sum that up is like making the connection during the interview is key, right? Like I love that you like the laundry list of what you mentioned there, but all of the elements. I'm sure that was like it brought me back to exactly what you said when you had that call with the recruiter and you were like, I don't know what I'm going to do, right? And she was like, take a deep breath. So obviously that has impacted how you want to show up for your clients. And but it's really interesting that it really comes down to great communication, recognizing that everybody's a little bit different and knowing how to pivot within that conversation, right? But you said so many, oh man, you dropped a lot of great nuggets, Neha, like, acknowledging the successes and the challenges of whether it be the business or the person applying, right? And I love that you mentioned like stoking the ambition of their intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, because I think when we recognize that, that's when the connection really happens, right? What's in it for them? What's in it for me? Where does that come together? Where does that interweave? And so that we can be successful, so that we can be successful together. Because I think sometimes we forget about that, right?
We do.
Yeah.
Because, and I think, it's not intentional. I think recruiting is such a number focused game, which I love talking about data and how that's important too. But there's got to be, we have got to treat people more than numbers, and I think if we do that, we will actually cut down recruitment costs. And the reason why people and companies spend a lot of money on recruiters and recruitment costs is because there's no forethought. Everything happens in triage mode, right? Like, oh, this person quit the company, we need to hire someone right away. And when you go out with that intention, then you're really overlooking the recruitment process. And that person quits in 4 months and you're like, what's going on? This role's haunted, right? Like, the role isn't haunted. Your recruitment process isn't doing what it's supposed to do. It's not weeding out the candidates that aren't a good fit and attracting the people that are. And so when you have that, then you're spending money on recruiters, you're spending money on onboarding, on training, and then you're spending your energy, and then you're like having to do it all over again. And then it leads to more frustration, not to mention the other team members are now having to pick up the work because this person isn't performing or being let go or quitting. And so now you have 3 people doing the job of 4 or 5 people. And eventually you're going to start seeing turnover there, right? Because people are like, screw this. This is not my job. I'm not getting paid for this. Like, I'm out. And so it's so interesting, because the thing that people overlook is actually the most important thing. So I always tell people, don't make recruiting an afterthought. Plan for it ahead, right? Because the minute you go into triage mode and a Band-Aid mode instead of like a full throttle surgery, you're not fixing the problem. You're fixing it for like 2 days and then you're not, right? It's going to open up the wound and you're like, oh my gosh, like we're screwed. We have to start all over again.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it kind of brings us around to why retention, like you said, if you recruit properly, right, you cut down on recruiting costs. And I think retention has a very, very direct impact on the cost of recruitment. Can you share a little bit of some of maybe the best tips that you would share with a business on retaining staff? Because out there in the ecosystem right now, out there in the job market, that's where the employers are really struggling, right? They're struggling with not just recruiting, but keeping that great talent. And they have so many open positions. And like you said, when people are starting to pick up the slack, resentment starts to grow, right? And then you lose even more people. And it's just such a vicious circle. So why is retention so important, and how can employers do a much better job at that?
Yeah, so retention is important because it's kind of like client acquisition. So it's a lot cheaper to retain your employee than hire and onboard a new one. That's just the basic math, right? Like, one, they already know your systems, they know the people, they know the team, they know your clients, they know exactly what the business mission, vision, and values are. That's one. You've already onboarded them, you've spent your blood, sweat, tears, and money to getting them onboarded, getting them client facing, or internally getting them on the right initiatives so they can kick off projects and stay on deadlines. That's the first thing. The second reason why retention is important is a healthy company culture. Anytime you have high retention, it tells me that the company culture is healthy, right? And so what does that mean? That means that the company leaders are taking care of their employees, right? Which brings me to your second question, right? What can you do? How do you kind of foster this healthy culture? So the first thing I recommend is, if you haven't already, listen to the book by Simon Sinek. He talks about the infinite game, and he talks about the infinite-minded leader and the finite-minded leader. And it's really interesting to me. I think everybody should listen to this, whether you're CEO or not, it doesn't matter. It's really well thought out. And he talks about, when you're an infinite-minded leader, you're not in it for the competition at the short term. You're in it for the long haul. And he gives out great examples of how some companies are infinite-minded and some companies aren't. And he actually calls out a lot of companies that we know on both sides of the spectrum. But one of the things that I really think that, an infinite-minded leader does, he really thinks about not just what the employee brings to the company, but what the company brings to the employee, right? And so knowing that people spend 40 to 50 hours a week at work, whether you're remote, whether you're not, it doesn't matter. You're spending a lot of your time, a lot of your headspace, your bandwidth at work, right? You're putting your kids in daycare, schools, whatever, so you can be working and earning that income. Now, a lot of misconception is, and a lot of old school way of doing it is like, oh, the people need us, we don't need them. But this is where we need to switch that mindset, where I don't care what amazing product, service, money you have, but unless you have a good team, a good retention, you're going to continue going through the ebbs and flows of hiring, which isn't healthy for anybody, like I already mentioned, right? And so a couple of things you can do is start treating employees not as numbers, but with people that are contributing to your vision as a CEO. You started this company to impact thousands and millions of lives. Now, if you aren't taking care of your employees, like that's a huge no-no, right? Because if your employees aren't happy, your clients aren't going to be happy. That's going to affect your bottom line. So a couple of things you can do is definitely spend time doing anonymous surveys. Figuring out how burnt out are people at your team. How do they feel culturally? How are the benefits, right? How is their direct manager treating them? How is the PTO policy? Do anonymous surveys, gather that feedback, and implement them right away. I recommend doing these at the end of each quarter, at the most, at least every 6 months, right? And then don't just have those, hanging out somewhere, but actually implement, right? Take into account what was told to you and put it into action. Yeah. That's the first thing. The second thing is professional and personal development is huge, right? So investing in your employees, whether it's, hey, we're going to give you, $1,000 every 6 months, and, you could either use it to learn pivot tables in Excel, or you can use it to take your, wife and do a baking class together and learn how to bake. Again, it's stuff like that where people are like, oh my gosh, this person cares about me. They understand that I like baking. This has always been a goal of mine, or whatever that looks like. The other thing you can do is be, really open with the PTO, right? And I feel like this is where I always struggle when I work with clients who don't do a lot of PTO, because I'm like, people need to recharge. People need to step away. And if you're not allowing them to do that, they're going to burn out, and then you're going to see a drop in retention, right? So allowing people enough PTO to take time off and recharge. We all need that as humans, right? Like this is a basic necessity. So that, and then any other benefits like fertility benefits, pet benefits. You can even do, I worked with a client, and the first Friday of each month, they would have a mental health day where they would literally, this is when, you can go get a massage during the weekday. Your kids are still at school. Or you can pull your kids off and do a long weekend trip somewhere when things aren't crowded, right? Because it's not the traditional spring break or the Thanksgiving. So giving people that extra day made such an impact. And people love that, right? And the grand scheme of things, you're like, one day isn't a huge deal, but every month, right? That's when your cable guy can come in. That's when you can have lunch with your girlfriends, because weekends are busy for everybody. That makes such a huge impact. And I think finally, being transparent to people and listening to them, like actively listening to feedback, actively telling them what's going on in the company, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. People respect when you respect them enough to tell them things like that, right? And they're going to stick around because they know that you're not BSing. You're not telling them that we had a great month and then you didn't have a great month, right? So hosting quarterly business reviews, hosting, all hands on deck meetings, doing company offsites when you bring people in together at a really cool place like Cancun or whatever, and allowing people to learn about each other. I think those are things that people really stick around for.
Agree. I agree. I think the statistics are 75 to 80% of people leave their jobs because of the person they work for. So you had mentioned about taking action, right? That 360 review, or I guess it's a 180 review. I think and I love that you said is like, when you get that feedback from your employees, take action. And I would say even like, make sure you're making lots of noise about the action you're taking as well, because sometimes people get so wrapped up in the work, even though you from a good place are making changes, they may not see them right away, right? Because change takes time, especially in larger organizations. It's like it's like steering a aircraft carrier, right? It takes time to steer that big ship sometimes. But if you are really, and again, it comes back to transparency. If you make the noise, you tell the truth, like you're very open and engage people, because I see that happening as well in bigger corporations where it's kind of like the news, the headlines are like the top tier management people, they know what's going on. But as you go down the tier, I'd like to say go up the triangle, because it's the people at the top, they're the people that are doing all the work. The message gets diluted or lost. And then people don't feel engaged. And I think engagement, all of the actions or all of the technical things you just shared, like making sure there's great benefits, make sure that there's like ongoing training and development for your people, having like activities where the team can bond, all of those things contribute to feeling like you belong.
Exactly.
Right. And when you feel like you belong, like you're making a difference, like your actions, big or small, help to steer that big aircraft carrier, that's when people will show up. And it's not always about the money.
No, it's not always about the money. In fact, in the same book, Simon Sinek gave an example of the Container Store. And I want to call that out because Container Store was doing really great, and the leadership really took care of their employees, right? They made sure that they stayed at expensive hotels, and when they were traveling and selling and all the stuff. And so when Container Store went through a downturn, right? Because there's always going to be the pendulum swings one way and the other, right? So we're gonna have good times and bad, and that's just the nature of life and business. Well, the employees didn't even invoice, like they stayed at cheap hotels, first of all, but they didn't even invoice the leadership because they said, you took care of us 3 years ago, we're taking care of you today, and that story to this day makes me feel goosebumps, because I'm like, that's such like, I don't know how to, do that, right? Like for employees to be like, I'm going to stay at this hotel and I'm going to pay for it for my meals, it's because 3 years ago you were, paying for a lavish restaurant or, our lifestyle. And now it's our turn to give back. And if the Container Store leadership had never invested in them, they wouldn't have had those, right? And so they got through that tough hump because their employees gave back and they're there for the leadership. And so exactly, it's a psychological trigger of feeling safe, feeling belonged, feeling like you are taking ownership and contributing to a greater, bigger cause.
Yeah. And that sort of comes back to culture, right? When you develop that culture of ownership, of community, of belonging, that's when it starts to pay back, because people will they'll move mountains for you, right? I've experienced that as a people leader as well, as like when they understand the mission, when you're in it together, and they understand and believe in the mission. That's important because they got to believe too. But that's where persuasion or selling comes in, right? As a leader, it's not just about that candidate, but like way back to the beginning of this podcast when you talked about, hey, we got to sell ourselves in that interview process. But once you get that employee, now it's your job as that CEO or that business owner to now sell the company to them. It's a two-way street. Like it's not just a one and done. I got you now, and I think it's so important to create culture. And you kind of touched on that, right? All of those elements contribute to a great culture. Can you think of anything else that would like help people retain? And I think culture is a big thing. And what else can we do to like create, the desired business of the future?
Yeah, I would say, I'm really big on data. And so I think tracking like why people leave you, when they leave you, at what point in their tenure do they leave you, and figuring out what's going on. Because I feel like data tells a much more comprehensive, objective story, right? And so when you do exit surveys, or when people are leaving you or people are joining you, whatever that looks like, if people have been with you for a long time, continue gathering that data, whether it's anonymous surveys, whether it's exit surveys. That data is going to really outline what's happening and why it's happening. And if you feel like around 2 to 3 years people are really leaving here, can you add in a stock option at that point? Can you introduce some type of a cash bonus where if you stay with us for 4 years you get $50,000? You know what I mean? Like something like that to keep them incentivized. I've seen companies do that and I've advised people like, look at your data. Your data will tell you exactly what you need to know. And a lot of people don't track it, right? That's unfortunately the truth because they don't have the bandwidth, but this has got to be a priority. You've got to track your data. You've got to know not just in terms of your profit and loss, what's going on, but in terms of your people, what's going on as well. And once you see that data, you can also then measure like, if I'm, investing this much money in developing these people, is there a direct relation to my company profits, right? And you should see an impact, right? For the most part, a direct impact. And so then okay, that money gave me a good ROI, right? I spent $20,000 on professional development and my profits have almost doubled this year, right? Because people are actually coming up and like showing up because they know they belong and they're treating this company like their own. So I would say that's, the biggest thing, right? And then this is pretty self-explanatory, but don't cheap out on, regular necessary benefits. Like don't go with the cheapest medical, the cheapest dental, like people have families to raise, right? So you want to be thoughtful of that. People have health issues. So don't skimp out on that, right? Really be thoughtful about that because again, it's you investing in that employee's health and their family's health, and health is your wealth. If you don't have your health, you literally can't do anything. So because I was sick a couple weeks ago with just a stomach bug, but I will tell you, Wendy, I was like, I can't even get out of bed. I can't make dinner. I can't do my meetings. And it was just a bug. So imagine people are going through something much worse, right? So you want to be able to support and be there for them. So yeah, I would say those are the two additional things that I always recommend.
I love that. I love that. And also you mentioned earlier, even PTO, and for my Canadian listeners, that's paid time off. We call it vacation time up here.
Okay.
So I think the importance, and one of the things that I always like encouraged my team when I was a people leader is like that time off, that paid time off. I mean, part of it is they own taking it too, right? Because a lot of people there's some fear built in about taking time away from work. I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but it is a paid benefit. I mean, that's a benefit as well that you earn. And, this is something I say to my clients all the time because high performers really struggle with recharging and taking time off. They feel like they're going to momentum or something's going to like fall apart, or they're the only one who could do the job, which is a total BS story that we tell ourselves. But, we got to think of ourselves as rechargeable batteries, right? And so if you never put that rechargeable battery back in the recharger, it's not going to work. And if you don't let it recharge fully, you're never going to get it to work at its optimum, right? It's kind of like when you charge your devices, right? They always say, get it to at least, 90%, because if you don't, it shortens the life of the battery.
Right.
So, I think all of those things come into that bucket, right? Like health benefits for sure, because it's a way to recharge. A lot of people now are pouring into their mental health, like using their benefits to help support that, or their physical health, working with, physiotherapists or massage therapists or whatever it takes to keep their mind and their body in shape. And then of course, the time off is really, it's twofold, right? It's about recharging your battery, but it's also really balancing your life out. Because when you ignore that part of your life, like what's all the work worth if the other part of your life falls apart? right?
Exactly. I 100%
Sure.
I couldn't agree more. You've got to, and I think, one of the things you said that I want to call out is that we almost feel guilty when we take time off, but it's the societal programming, right? It's like if you're not working, you're doing something wrong. And then how dare you get this paycheck, right? But it's okay to step away. It's okay, to be like, no, this is where I disconnect. And I tell my team all the time. In fact, we have a, a Slack channel where like, if you're having a rough day, take it off. Hand over what isn't getting done and take off and step away. Because I really feel like if you are not in the right mood, that's the energy you're attracting anyway. So like step away, right? Go get in a good mood, go take a bath, go watch a movie, go eat some ice cream, whatever. Like go cuddle up with your dogs or your kids, step away, and then literally just 2 hours away will make such a huge impact, right? And then people will come back the next day and they get so much more done because now they're re-energized and they are ready to go. So instead of like making people half ass it, you're basically like, okay, you're going to come back in tomorrow and you're going to be recharged and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I say too. Like when you're recharged, you come back with so much more energy. You're so much more effective, right? More productive.
Exactly.
And I think if people even get that mindset for themselves, like if I give myself this break, I'm going to come back that much better and stronger and rested. And I'm going to want to do the everyday stuff. And that's why it's important to take vacation. Now, you also mentioned employee surveys, but you also mentioned something else I do not want the listeners to miss, and that's exit surveys, because I think that is probably one of the largest opportunities for businesses, because unless you come from a company and have that experience where an exit interview was given to you as an employee, you don't understand the value as a business owner that the exit interview can give you, right? Because you said that's where a lot of the data comes from.
Exactly.
So like if I'm a small business and I have a team of 20 people, how do I kind of start to formulate that logic and build that into my business to ensure that I do get those data points going forward?
I mean, definitely, have a CRM that can collect this data, right? That's the first step. So it doesn't have to be anything expensive. It can even be a spreadsheet if you want, right? With pivot tables and graphs and, and then later on you can invest in a fancy system. But I would say that anytime, you have the anonymous surveys, document that. Google Forms, Tally Forms, they all do a great job of, you can hide like your name and you can fill it out and the results stay with you on the Google Drive. So that's, I would say the first thing is implement a simple, easy to use system. Don't let the system and process of it turn you away, because a lot of people just get overwhelmed thinking about it and then it never gets done. Don't do that. Start small. It can be really scrawny. It doesn't matter. Just get the data, because then you're going to start having something to build, right? You're going to have the foundation. So once you have that, really in your meetings, I always emphasize why data is important, why we want to qualify it, why we want to quantify it. And then we can't act on stuff unless we have data to tell us what to do, right? Like if no one's telling me you're unhappy, I'm assuming everyone's happy. That's because no one's said anything. And so anonymous surveys are the best way to do that. Exit surveys are the best way to do that. And so once you start quantifying and qualifying this data, then you can say, okay, you know what? This team over here that's working with this specific client is telling me they're like burnt out, like at number 8 out of a 10. That's not a good thing. So then I'm going to actually schedule a call with that team and find out what's causing them to be burnt out. Is it the emails? Is it the Slack messages? Is it the calls? What is it about that client that's causing them to burn out? And they're like, you know what? There's just a lot to do. We feel like we need one extra person. Boom. I can hire one extra person. The next time I do the survey, their burnout meter is running real low because now I've given them the support. But unless they tell me that, as a business owner, I'm doing so many things. I can't be like, okay, how are you feeling today? Okay, how are you feeling today? Okay, it's not possible, right? So for me to collect this data and then say, okay, I understand the problem. This is the solution. We're going to work on this. And until I find you that person, I'm going to jump in and help you for the next 2 weeks, right? And so that way, and then right away, I've saved anybody from quitting the team, because now I'm like, controlling, what's going on in a good way. And so I would say definitely get the system, get the process, implement these things. And then I think the biggest thing here is to be open and receptive to feedback, because that's another thing where founders will read that and they'll be like, nope, this is too expensive. We can't do this. We don't care. Not right now. Maybe next year. But really listen and implement, because if you don't do that, then you defeat the purpose of, and then people aren't going to fill out surveys next time because they know nothing's going to get done, right? And I always tell my team when we do surveys, do not give me 4s and 5s. Do not give me 9s and 10s. I want to see lower numbers. And it's okay. Like, you're not getting a raise by giving me a 10. Like, I'm not going to, whatever. Like, I'm not going to give you a raise because you give me all 10s. I want to know what's not working, because if I know what's not working, I can fix it, right? And I can make it better for you guys so you stick around, right? So my feelings aren't going to get hurt. I'm a big girl. I can figure it out and I can actually help you, right? But unless you are open to that actual honest feedback, like, people are, one, not going to care and not fill it out. And two, they're just not going to take it seriously, because you're like, okay, well, whatever I do, it's not like anything gets implemented. So why does it matter?
Exactly. That's where that transparency comes in. And that, again, where emotional intelligence comes in, right? How you react to feedback is very important in a leadership role, and your ability to take action and disassociate yourself. It's not personal, right? A lot of those things are business related. And when you're a people leader, sometimes it reflects, like, it will come directly to you, but you have to look at it through like a very objective lens. Sometimes you are the problem, and sometimes it's the situation that's the problem.
Right. And if you are the problem, it's better to find out sooner than later, right? Yeah. Like, I always say, like, and even with kids, we give them feedback right away. We don't wait until, like, 6 months from now to be like, no, you need to clean up your mess. You tell them right away, hey, clean up your mess, right? So it's the same concept. You want to get that feedback right away, because the next time the child drops something, they know what to do, right? But if you just aren't open to it, then you're never going to change. And I feel like when you stay stagnant as a leader, that's the worst position you can be in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's because the business, it'll reflect in the business being able to change and grow as well, because that's what makes businesses successful, is their ability to pivot, to grow. Like, because, as technology changes, and I know you deal directly with tech companies, like, if anybody knows how much, like, things change, it's tech. Because like, one day this is the new thing, and the next day it's like old news. So being able to do that as a leader, and I hear you're doing that in your business as well, Neha, and I think that's awesome, right? So I want to take a moment now, like, I have your introduction at the beginning of this podcast, but I would love to, like, this is your chance to shine and promote your business, right? Let's do the sales pitch for your business, because you share with me, you are so diverse and you cover so many things. So can you tell my listeners really what your business does and how they can find you?
Yep. So we do a couple of things. So the very first thing is, if you're looking to hire talent, whether it's a commission or hourly model, we can help you. We have the tools, the technology, the data processes to get you your quality hire in the least amount of time, but taking into account all the things we talked about, right? So the empathetic interview process, the retention, all that stuff. The second thing we do is that if you are a employer and you're having to lay people off, unfortunately, because of what's going on right now, we have employee transition packages where we work with the employees that are being laid off and work with them directly in getting their resumes, their LinkedIn's up to date, working on mindset coaching, interview training, all things, right? So getting them ready for that next opportunity. This is also really important, because when you are there for your employees, not just when they're working for you, but once they leave you, you are developing that culture that, you are there for them, right? And you're going to come across literally as a hero. The third thing we do is, if you're a candidate looking for work, reach out to us. We can help you fix up your resume, your LinkedIn profile, instruct you on creating video resumes, and then also apply to jobs on your behalf at no cost. So if you're looking for that, reach out to us for sure. And then I have a consultancy offering too. So if you're a startup looking to scale, we have a DIY course that you can watch. You get 6 weekly sessions with me, and we basically get you ramped up to where you are at a stage to make your first couple of hires, right? So this is great. And then one of the things I'm launching in July is for people who want to start their own recruiting agencies, and you're interested in doing that, because there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of money to be made in recruitment. We have a step-by-step system and approach where we can help you set that up, and we work with you for free until you land your first 5 clients. So that's
awesome.
our guarantee.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's coming in July. So that's like a one-on-one, like, consulting, right?
Correct.
Then you have your course for finding a job, and then you also, like, work with companies. So that's amazing. So where can people find you?
Yep, you can go to the website. It's www.recruit, so RecruitGyan.com. And then you can also email me at Neha, Neha.Naik at recruitgyan.com.
Awesome.
And then you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Oh, perfect. And so I will make sure that all of those links are included in our podcast notes today. And I just want to thank you for coming on for a couple of reasons. First of all, hey, female entrepreneurs, CEOs, we love having those guests on the podcast because we are a rare breed. And I love to promote other women in business, specifically women in leadership roles, because it's just proof that we can get there, right? And pass it on to the next generation, because everything is possible. And also sharing all of your knowledge around recruitment, retention, how companies can really show up for their employees as well, and how you support all of the different seasons and different journeys in that job path, right? So I think it's just amazing. So I just want to thank you again, Neha, for coming on, sharing your knowledge, being a fantastic guest, and I can't wait to hear more in the future about all the things that you're doing.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor, and I'm excited to do this again soon sometime. Thank you to all the listeners, and excited to connect with you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Peace and stay safe.
Hey friends, be sure to subscribe to the Living Life with Wendy podcast, and you can also follow me on my other social platforms. I can be found on the World Wide Web at www.wendybowman.com, on Instagram as Coach Wendy Bowman, on Facebook at Resolve Coaching and Consulting, and finally on YouTube as Wendy Easton Bowman. I want to thank you again for joining me on Living Life with Wendy. Now go out there and live your best life.